So what kind of leadership do we need in the future? And what are we seeing in the market right now in terms of when we look at job descriptions and what kind of language you're using to describe those jobs, and what is going to make our teams more agile, and what is going to take us into the future? Well, the first thing that I'd like to put out there is that a 25-year-old concept that was written by Robert Greenleaf, a book called The Servant Leader, is actually coming back. And when you look at the language used in job descriptions, and this is for anybody who is senior manager and above, there's a lot of language around who is going to be the guardian of our culture, who is going to promote our culture, who is going to take care of our people. The words, soft skills, that we never thought were going to be promoted higher than managing our P&L, like empathy and promoting a growth mindset and learning behavior, all of those things are becoming more important. And what does it mean to be a servant leader? To be a servant leader means that you are going to make the people that you have, that you are taking care of, you're going to make them more successful than you are yourself. So other words that are used are people who are low ego, people who are level 5 leadership, a la Jim Collins. And so there's another theme that I'd like to introduce there, is that if this is the kind of leader at the executive level and the people who are managing large teams in P&L, what are we doing to actually support our frontline managers? So people managers, people who have become absolutely the cornerstones of our leadership team, especially in this post-hybrid working environment. People who have had one thing after another added to their plate. We expect them to be culture managers. We expect them to be empathetic. We expect them to almost be psychologists in the work environment. And then, of course, they actually have to be minding the results too. And so the challenge that I would make to consejeros or to board members, I would say, what are we doing today to make sure that we have support and we have programs in place to support those frontline managers, who many are suffering significant rates of burnout? And if we had €1 million to spend in learning and development, where would we spend it? Would we spending our executive leaders to fancy offsites or giving them expensive executive coaching? Or would we redirect those funds to the leaders of the future and figure out how we are going to make them those servant leaders, those guardians of our culture, those promoters of our people and growth mindset? How are we going to take care of them in the future? So when we think about culture and we think about purpose and we think about pride of belonging in a company, why are new generations focusing more on that? And I would go beyond that. I would say that, if you look at any survey that comes out of any big consulting firm, and I'm talking about the McKinseys and the Accentures and the BCGs of the world, when we look at the way that those generations are looking at their jobs, there are very blurred lines between what is happening in society, the narratives that we're telling about our economy that are being very much looked for when a person is looking to join a company and is looking to stay at a company. They want to feel aligned with the purpose of the company, and they want to believe in that mission, vision, and values. But they also want to see that reinforced as they're going through their journey within the company. And it's really curious because there are two things that keep a person in a company. The first thing is having the ability to develop themselves within that company, but the other one is having personal connections. That could be a friend at work, that could be having a really good boss, that could be having a team that they really feel identified with. So it's not just at the macro level, it's also at a micro level in the company. And so therefore, when we're looking at this from an executive team perspective, again, I'll go back to how are we making sure that shows up in our people leaders? And how are we making it that shows up? How we make that show up in the way that we talk to the market about how we hire, who we hire, when we hire, and what that person can expect when they're in the company. So pride of belonging, I would put the belonging in that word. And that absolutely has to do with a lot of diversity, equity, inclusion, but it also has to do with looking much more broadly beyond the skills that we need or the roles that we need in the company, but rather the skills that we need in the company. And that could also mean the soft skills. We talked a lot, during the session today about looking for people who have growth mindset, lifelong learners, because we know that skills now they have a half-life between 2 and 5 years, depending on which sector that you're in. And so when we're hiring, You can also expect better engagement from people who are very curious, who are very creative, and are very eager to learn. And if you're offering those things to those people, you can expect more pride of belonging, a better identification with the culture, and more engagement in the company. So when we're looking at cultures that absolutely have their culture, mission, vision, values focused in innovation. So we can think of cultures that absolutely come to mind today when we think of Tesla and Amazon, et cetera, and the companies that we all admire and kind of look to as beacons of innovation in our economy. And the first thing I want to say is that innovation is driven by ideas, which is driven by people. It's not just the technology, it's the people who are driving the ideas. And I think the first thing to promote a culture of innovation is make sure that innovation is not just in the R&D department, that innovation is the responsibility for everyone, and that our frontline managers are encouraging innovation. The other thing is embracing failure. And I know that this is very controversial when we talk about embracing failure. You can put not rules or processes around failure, but you can talk about failure in a way that it is more linked to trial and error and not necessarily to how much money you lose. But you have to make it acceptable, especially when you're looking at performance review. You have to make it look acceptable that people are taking intelligent risks. When I worked at LinkedIn, that is actually one of the ways that we talked about risk in LinkedIn is taking intelligent risks, meaning we actually know that this could potentially have a positive impact on our business or in the market or in our society, and we'd like to experiment with this. So you can experiment on a relatively small scale and make relatively small experiments, and then know that some of these big ideas will eventually have an impact that will keep our employees engaged in the company, make them believe that innovation is possible and they can be responsible for innovation. And then also, we are making innovation responsible for everybody. And the last thing I would say is the way that we approach innovation today, we don't actually talk about it enough. And so we all know as leaders that communication with the rest of our company and the rest of our teams is incredibly important. But what you absolutely have to do is make sure that you are telling these stories around innovation, not just the success stories, but also the failures, and then talking about what you learned from both of those processes in the end.